go. All right, we are good. We are live. Welcome to another session of Dawn Patrol. Of course, as usual, the usual suspects are here. Larry Bond and Chris Carlson. I do have Tom, my friend from Warsaw, also in attendance. This is the. We're also going to be talking about a planned submarine development over the years, from the early years forward. Chris will be talking about that soon enough, maybe at the halfway point here. But this first topic, though, has been one I've been wanting to get into, but I've been avoiding because I didn't want to fangirl too much on Larry. But Hunt for Red October and Red Storm Rising, of course, written by the glorious Tom Clancy, who everybody here, of course, knows well. I just reread Hunt for Red October because it's been a long time. I'm pretty sure I read it originally just from renting it from the library or loaning it from the library, but I did finally buy it. I do have an original copy of Red Storm Rising first print. Very happy with that, but it's falling apart now. I don't know if any. I don't know if you still have your Red Storm Rising copies, but yeah, they're getting a little rough around the edges right now, but I do still have that. So I'm gonna open the floor, Larry, to start off, just to kind of maybe explain where you first met Tom and just kind of where it went from there.
Well, it's not something I haven't talked about before, but basically, it's because I wrote Harpoon. First edition of it came out in April of 1980, and Tom was an insurance agent in rural Maryland and bought a copy of it and used it as one of his many data sources when he was writing The Hunt for Red October. And I can prove that because if you go to chapter 17, he
Hmm.
talks about the Russian firing a Type F torpedo. Well, there is no Russian Type F torpedo, but when I wrote the first edition of Harpoon in 79, uh, there was no information available on the designations of Russian torpedoes. And we knew they had a straight runner. We knew they had a passive homing acoustic. We knew they had an active passive homing torpedo. We knew they had. So the best you could get was a wire guided torpedo, and that was the sixth one up. So that was the Type F torpedo, and that's the one that the Russian Alpha fires. Um, he wrote a letter to me with some questions, which I have in my file back here, and I answered him, which is why I always answer my mail, and and we ended up corresponding, talking on the phone, became very good friends. Went out to his house, which was this little cracker box from rural Maryland back when he only had three kids, and I'm godfather to his fourth kid, and just had a really good relationship with him. I watched. He asked me some questions about Hunt because he was working on that, and it was stuff like, is it hard right rudder or right hard rudder, naval terminology, that kind of thing. And he gave me a very nice gong in the front of Hunt, and went to the book party when that came out, which was not a huge thing.
Right.
It was at his house. We had blinis and other Russian food, and
Huh.
it was you know. And anyways, I continued to correspond with him and talk to him on the phone Saturday mornings. Um, I remember one thing we did together was we went to see uh, Steve Jobs show the Mac
Oh
down in
wow.
Washington D.C., and we did that together. That was quite a show.
Huh.
And then at that show, I was talking about another book that I was working, or another game I was working on called Convoy, and I was going to take the Harpoon engine and talk about the Reforger convoys, which were supposed to be supplying NATO with all the reinforcements they need in the event of a Russian attack. The, the This is back when we thought the Russians were going to be sending bunches of submarines south, a la World War II. We've since found out that wasn't the case, but back in the 80s, this was our vision of how the Russians would act. So I'm blathering on about backfire strikes and convoys and with hundreds of ships in them, and Tom said that would make a good book. That was his genius, and I went, okay. And he said, "You want to work on it with me?" And to my discredit, I actually thought about it for a couple of minutes before I said yes. Uh, and we worked on the book together, plotted it out. Uh, I was basically doing staff studies. We had some terrible, really, really strong disagreements about the course of the war and how it should go. Uh, Tom, he was a really smart guy for having never served in the military. He looked at Iceland and said, "This is a strategic piece of real estate. The Russians need to capture it." And I was very doctrinaire. I said, this is not part of the Russians are not into power projection. They can't, they have very limited airborne and amphibious assets, which they've already clearly earmarked for the Baltic and other areas. They're launching this huge ground war. Why would they want to take Iceland? And we did some gaming, we did some analysis, something called the Keflavik turkey shoot, which sort of convinced us that, yep, they're going to need to take Iceland. And then, I'm going, oh my God, how are they going to do it? They've only got this many. And Tom found the Ro-Ro ships, and he picked one, Julius Fusick, which could carry the better part of an airborne division. No problem. I mean, I did all the math, looked at the vehicle loading, and I said, yeah, they can put an airborne division aboard this thing. And that's what we used in Operation Polar Glory, was this, surprise invasion. So it was he was constantly fighting against my doctrinaire. I'm reading the doctrine, trying to implement that. And he goes, no, we got to think further than that, because the Russians are trying to surprise us. And he wrote, has to be 95% of it. I mean, there's bits of me scattered throughout Red Storm, but basically I was his apprentice and watched him put it together, fix it when it wasn't working right, and then at the end we had this book that blew the doors off of Danielle Steele. It was great.
That was the litmus.
Well, it made us feel good.
Yeah. So paint a picture here. So this is both, so Red Storm. When did Red Storm come out? 85. Is that right? Hold on a second. I'm trying to get my dates right here. When was the debut of the book? So that was 86. But so Red October was late October of 84, I think, was the debut of the book. So give me if I'm not mistaken, you had done like the Flight of the Valkyries. Is that the correct term for the scenario for the
Dance of the Valkyries, Dance of the Vampires.
Dance of Vampires. I'm sorry, I'm making up names. But what time, like how far ahead of writing? That was one. I seem to remember you saying that you did physically war game that out at one point or another. Did you?
Several points. Well,
yeah, okay.
Again, I think Tom had actually started writing the book, but the big thing, this was the big contingency that the Navy was always worried about in the 1980s, was a massed backfire strike on a carrier battle group or several carrier battle groups. During our research, which was a lot of fun, and we went all over the place, talked to a lot of people, and some NATO people told us dead on that they wouldn't go up into the Norwegian Sea without a multiple carrier battle group. And at that point, Russian doctrine, says that you not only use the backfire regiments that are in Soviet naval aviation, use second over to SNA the backfire regiments that are in long range aviation. And so now you're talking a 3 or a 4 or a 5 regiment strike on this multiple carrier battle group. And it was just huge. It was it would be like Dance of Ride of the Valkyries and just this huge, huge air battle, air sea battle, and we wanted to understand what was going on. So we gamed out a smaller. I think we used Chris. Did we use three regiments in the Dance of the Vampires?
Yeah, I think it was three with some Badgers, the
And then
EW Badgers.
yeah, and then it was two U.S. carriers with a French carrier as well. So that's a three carrier battle group. And doing this manually, we had to be fools doing this manually. And luckily, I mean, I had at my fingertips this this talent. I didn't know how lucky I was because I had guys in my gaming group who were serving naval officers and former naval officers. From what my work at CNA, I had friends like Peter Perla, one of the world's best war gamers, rest in peace. And uh, I put together this team, and we did it. We got real serious about this. We had a pre-sale brief. People were writing up operations orders, and gamed it out. And the first time it did not go so well, but we were all fired up, and we wanted to do it again and do it right. So there was a second time, which unfortunately had to be aborted. And I don't remember why, Chris. Do you?
Well, we ran part of it because
Yeah.
the write up's still there, but we didn't get as far
No.
on the second one.
And then the third time, I mean, and you got to understand, each of these games involved multiple 8-hour sessions with a heck of a lot of paperwork involved, sort of like real war. And at the end, by the way, I did write all this up. There's corporate memory, and what we were doing was not trying to get to a certain result or to get something that we could use in the book. We just wanted to understand the flow of the battle, where were the critical decision points, and just how do things fit together. And at the end, Tom took that and completely transformed that information into his own strategy. And this is Tom. Again, there are so many numbers flying around, but Tom latched onto the fact that the speed of an AS5 Kelt. I'm trying to remember the Russian designation right now, but it doesn't matter because everybody still says it the AS5.
It's the AS6, Larry, and it's the Ka-22.
Oh no! I'm talking about the Kelt.
The decoys. Yeah.
Yeah, because he noted that speed was the same as the cruise speed of a Badger bomber. So, and he had, in the course of all our research, we noted that the Russians used older, out of service cruise missiles as targets. That's how they expended their end of life missiles that they didn't want anymore. So Tom was the one who came up with the idea of having a regiment fire these Celts so it would look like a Badger regiment coming in, or multiple Badger regiments. Navy would expend its SAMs and cap against that. Meanwhile, the backfire strike comes in, and that's the real attack. Now, again, that was totally on Tom. The only thing that I disagree with is at one point he's got a phalanx mount in there that gets confused by having multiple targets. And I'm sorry, Tom, that doesn't happen. That's the one thing that they designed it specifically to handle. So I disagree with him on that. He said leave it in. I said fine, you're the boss. But other than that, that's all Tom.
Did you to go back to Hunt for just a moment? Did you ever have any discussions with Tom after the fact of that book release about any of the way that he depicted certain things in Hunt for October as a book? And I'm just curious, later on, were you both in any way contacted by the screenwriter for the movie for any types of the movie for Hunt for October is quite different than the book. pretty significantly. And so, I mean, it keeps all like main kind of reveals and decision points, but it's very much not as much of a like the book is very much more of a fleet action, right? Or worth of action, while the movie was definitely more character driven, which of course absolutely helps the movie. The movie is fantastic. So did you ever end up having any conversations about where the movie depiction of the book differed, and or any other types of discussions after the fact about Hunt with him?
No, my discussions with Tom about the movie were all about, hearing from him, you
Okay.
know, all the stuff that he did. I mean, he did go out to Hollywood. By the way, he was terrified of flying. So they actually rented a private train to take them across the country. And, he got to meet Sean Connery, got to meet Alec Baldwin, yada, yada, yada. And then they got him off the set as quickly as possible. The last guy you want on the movie set is the writer. And, and as a storyteller, I look at what they did to the story to make it work in a movie. And if you go to the back half of the book where they're setting up the big con, there's a lot of stuff going on. Now, when you're reading it and you're deeply immersed in it, that reads through very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
But to show all those steps on the
Mm-hmm.
screen would slow down the pacing.
Yeah.
So they went with this other deception.
They took the pieces that mattered, I guess, from a move the movie story forward, and then I mean, I'm just wondering if
Yeah.
so it doesn't sound like the screenwriter reached out that much to Tom for any
Well,
clarity,
there's a
or did
story
they?
about that with one of the later books, Patriot Games. I
Okay.
can tell that
Yeah.
is that
Go ahead.
back when they were working on Patriot Games, uh, the producer was a guy named Mace Neufeld, and they were working with the book. And unfortunately for Tom, well, the story, uh, Neufeld went and saw Die Hard, which is a great
Uh,
flick,
mm-hmm.
Christmas joy, whatever. But Mace really took that aboard in a way that Tom didn't like, and because if in the original book, the at the end the terrorists have everybody in the house and they're and the cavalry shows up with the FBI's hostage rescue team, and it's kind of the cavalry comes over the horizon. It's a very traditional ending, but it worked. I really liked the book. But Mace says no, no, no. He's going to tell Ryan is going to tell the hostage rescue team to sit down and be quiet because he wants to take care of these guys personally. And so he's going to go in there personally. And Tom I wasn't there for the initial reaction, but he called me and talked about how this is an completely opposite to the Jack Ryan character, who's supposed to be this middle-aged analyst who writes books, and all of a sudden he's Captain America. No, that's not going to work. And he explained all this, the characterization, everything, to the screenwriters, to Mace, and they went, "Oh, okay, we get it now." So they went back and made some changes. They were all
Adjustments. Yeah.
and they showed it to Tom. And Tom going, "No, no, 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 no. Let me explain it in simpler terms." And okay, we get it. So they went back and they came back, and it was again cosmetic changes, but it was still. And Tom just said, "Take my name off the picture."
Okay.
And oh, you were serious? Okay. And then they went off and they came up with the ending you see in the book or in the movie, which actually works because and is more dramatic because you have this guy who is again true to character, middle-aged analyst, and all of a sudden he's thrust into this situation
into it.
because
More.
there is no cavalry. He's all there is, and that's much more exciting. Although they could have done if they had shown those anchor flukes one more time, I probably would have shouted something in the theater. Watch out for the anchor, but that worked, and there's a lesson there about sometimes to get really creative, you got to have a gun to your head. Sometimes you really have to, but they performed under pressure and they got a good movie out of it.
Mm-hmm.
But we wanted to do. We were hoping somebody would nibble on Red Storm Rising,
Yeah,
And
that
you
was going to
know,
be my next question.
my
Were
our
were
I'm
there
sorry.
ever did it ever get did anybody ever at least purchase the rights to it? Did
Well,
they
they don't
hold
purchase them. It's called an option.
option? Okay,
The option is a right to negotiate in your name
right.
with your property. And yeah, we got a call, and Lorimar wanted to
Oh
do a
yeah.
mini series of it
Oh wow.
of Red Storm Rising, and this is in the '80s when miniseries were hot.
Mm-hmm.
And Tom and I are doing cartwheels. We were just like, yes, go fly and be free. And Lorimar goes to HBO and says, "Hi, we want to do this miniseries of Red Storm Rising." And HBO went, "Cool, how much?" And Lorimar told him, and and Lorimar, HBO like, just and
Well, here's the thing, like if you could transport HBO of today to then, they
uh,
probably would have done it. They
well, it
absolutely
was
would have
all
done
about it was all about a cast of thousands. I mean, you would have
it.
needed to feed. Lunch for the Russian army is not going to be cheap, and
Right.
and the sheer cost of it was simply prohibitive. And Tom and I got that. We were very disappointed, but what are you going to do? Nowadays, they just CGI out the whole thing. And maybe with Russia being the big bad out there, if there are any if there are any agents, the movies, the rights are still available, but yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you never. Hmm. Yeah,
Tom,
never.
Tom's attitude on the whole thing, by the way, was take the money and run.
Yeah,
After
sure.
Patriot games, he just like
Yeah.
he didn't want to do that again.
Yeah. At that point, he was still writing, right? So yeah, I think he kind of wanted to get back to his. I would assume he wanted to get back to writing more than anything else.
Well, yeah, he loved it. I mean,
Yeah.
if you talked to him on the phone, he was always using stories when he talked, adjectives. He had a fantastic memory and obviously an eye for detail because he could pull little significant facts out and put them together in a way that nobody had done before.
Very good. Any questions from the crowd in specific about kind of the early Clancy novels and some of that development we just talked about? Let's see. Has better build. Storm Rising with 3D ADC. Oh yeah, sure, absolutely. Um, Chris Sebald thought the movie was a comedy. It had funny parts. I don't know if it was entirely intended to be a comedy, Chris, but I'll give you that. This is one comment from Cave Fig. The USN definitely used those waves of backfires when they were doing the Rastra training. So I'm assuming that was late '80s wargaming there, Cave. I don't know if you want
Oh,
to.
we spent a lot of time at Center for Naval Analyses trying to figure out a way to deal with a mass backfire strike. Because, I mean, a regiment has book strength of 27 aircraft, so maybe they put up 25 or 24.
Hmm.
Those aircraft can carry two Ka-22 missiles each, which in the 1980s were a flying nightmare for the Navy. They come in at supersonic speeds and then they nose over into a Mach 3.5, Mach 4 dive. And the Navy spent billions, literally, coming up with the F-14 Phoenix system, Phalanx, and the SM-2 Standard Missile 2, which was all part of an integrated system that was specifically designed to deal with a mass missile attack. By the way, we have a article on our website, which is it was appeared in Naval War College Review, was it, Chris? Which talks about what it looked like from the Russian side.
Yeah.
And they thought it was basically a suicide run
Hmm.
because they're flying into an ocean basin that is surrounded by hostile bases
Hmm.
and probably engaging one of the most sophisticated air defense systems that you could possibly devise. So they weren't sure that anybody was going to come home from that.
And on top of it, to attack a convoy, a backfire could only carry one missile because they just didn't have the tanker assets. So if you were well south of Iceland, they were coming down with one bird.
Yeah, in the Norwegian Sea, they could carry 3.
Yep.
And in
The
the
Iceland, around Iceland, they could carry 2.
yeah, and then
And
south of
that
that.
wouldn't necessarily sink some of those larger merchant vessels, correct?
Well, it would tear a heck of a divot out of them.
Okay, all right.
I mean, it's a 1-ton warhead,
Okay.
and the sheer kinetic energy of it
Mm-hmm.
would probably carry it right through the bottom of the ship.
Speaking of kinetic energy, there was one question, but I'll re-ask this later. But it's about the hypersonic carrier killers. I might unhide that later. But so very similarly, I think we're in a similar. There are similar but different questions now for similar scenarios. So, but completely different technology. But
Right.
we're asking the same questions really all.
But the only hypersonic carrier killers right now are ballistic missiles.
Okay.
Hypersonic glide vehicles, it's all the big talk. The problem is by the time they get a detection, remember, these things are gliding. There's no power. There's no thrust. To make a massive change in course at that late date, boy, howdy, would that be problematic.
So Chris just asked.
Yeah, the other problem with it is that you have to target, and the Chinese have still not demonstrated the ability to accurately target a carrier battle group. In other words, not know that it's just in this area or specifically in a little area region, but exact positions. If you don't have that, you can't aim, and that makes it worth it.
So Chris was asking, would you consider David Ayer as a producer director for bringing your works to film? And actually, this kind of segues into another question I've had, is whether or not either of you have received any option talk about books that you all have written.
Mm-mm.
No, okay. Unfortunately not. I don't know David Ayer's work. Can you give me a movie he's done?
Chris, you might have to mention it. I don't remember his work either. Hold on a second.
Frankly, I consider anybody. Well,
he did Fury. He did Fury, which is a great World War II tank.
Oh,
film.
I've seen Fury.
Yeah, End of Watch. Okay, now I know who you're talking about. Yeah, and he did End of Watch. He did the Bright movie on Netflix. He did The Beekeeper is his most recent one. So yeah, he would probably do it justice, especially from what he did with Fury. I think he would do something justice.
Well, I think the lone tank holdout against an SS battalion was
a bit of a stretch.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Slightly. I mean,
particularly an M4.
The first Panzer should have taken them out. Okay, give me a break. But it was a good movie, had good acting in it. What I liked about it was they were really going for authenticity. I mean, I think there was an actual working Tiger that they brought in for that movie. One of the few that actually still run. So I liked the movie. I mean, nothing wrong with it, but and I like the theme about getting emotional about it. That was something that needs to be known.
Yeah. All right. I think we will kind of tie off that topic now here, and maybe hand the reins over to Chris if you want to present your plan development presentation.
Where are you? Oh, there you are.
I'm going to mute myself so I don't mouth breathe.
Share screen.
Oh, by the way, Chris also mentioned that David was a shipmate of his, so that's interesting in and of its right.
Do we see this?
We do now.
Okay. All right. This
you're showing your AOL mail. You're not showing your.
Oh, hang on. Let me go find out what's going on with this.
So you're sharing a window, but maybe not the window you wanted. I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to remove it until you.
Let me try this again. Because they give you so many options that oh, we don't want to do that. Okay, let's try this. We'll do this. Now we'll try it. How's that?
I am seeing your.
Whoa.
Yeah, you might need to click on your other
My
tab
eyes,
if
my
you have one
eyes.
there.
Yeah.
Is it one of? It's.
Yeah, let me get off of this because it keeps doing that.
Well, just pull the tab away from the. Pull the tab away from that.
Yeah.
There. There's somebody at my door. I need to go look. Answer real quick. Sorry, y'all.
Okay, now let's try this. How's that?
That is showing. Yep. I think that's showing it. I'm just seeing the text, right? Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, we just have text right now.
Yep, go for it.
Okay, so this is a slightly expanded version that I did for the Navy Submarine League. This shows you all the panelists that were put together by Dave Rosenberg, who was a Navy Reserve captain retired. Dave and I had served in a couple of reserve units before, and I knew him for long way back, I'm afraid. And then so I presented on the history of the submarine, Chinese submarine force, and then everybody else had some other discussions. I think this has been posted, the video of it, but I don't have a link, so you'd have to go looking for it. But in general, what we're talking about here is just the Chinese submarine force. And if you look at where they are now to when they started, these guys came to the game really, really late. They didn't get their first submarine until 1954, and they just were slow, really slow at developing their own submarines. Partly because at this time, the PLAM was hardly the priority for defense spending. All the emphasis was on coastal defense. They were afraid of the big bad U.S. amphibious assaults. And so the Army, quite frankly, and to some degree the Air Force, had most of the attention. But if you look at them historically, the Chinese really have gone through the old classic 3 phases of crawl, walk, and run. And you can see the dates here, and it's all based on their maritime strategy at the time. As they've pushed out further and further, they've actually had to improve their submarines. So where they are right now is, they're up on a full-scale sprint. So if you look at the beginning, as you would expect, it's Russian boats. They got 4 Type S, the 9 bis variety, and they got 4 Type M's, the Type 15 variety. They started being transferred in late 1954 through 55. You got 4 ocean-going boats, 4 coastal boats. And while these were World War II designs, they were actually built post-World War II. I think the Type S's were built in 1947 to 48, and the Type M's were like 49. So this is how they started. Then they took a licensed production of the Project 613. This is the Whiskies, based on the Type 21 U-boat. And there's a lot of different types of Whiskies. The Chinese produce the Type 4 and the Type 5. The big difference between them is the lack of the pedestal 25 millimeter mount. That's really the only difference. They built a good number of these, and they kept them in service for a long, long time. Towards the end, they were largely training boats, but these were ocean-going, anti-surface type weapons, and they actually did a pretty good job of cranking up their production. They then modified this to the Type 033, And what they did is they actually got kits. I believe they got up to 6 kits of the Romeo class, and they built 2 of them. And then after that, they just started cranking them out like candy. They built a lot of them. These are just bigger boats with greater range, but basically the same weapons and sensor suite. And these kept going and going, and just like the Energizer Bunny, and the last one was taken out of the order of battle in 2011. And then they went one bigger, and they made the 035. The first 2, not so much. They just built a bigger ship, and they tried to throw in the same electric motors, and surprise, it didn't go as fast. And endurance was an issue, and they were somewhat noisy. So they then went and built the 035A. They put in proper motors for it. And then they went to the 035G, where they finally got away from the early Russian sonar systems. And they included a mock-up of a passive ranging array, the DUUX-5. And you can see the antennas locations. You can see the little triangles here, here, and here. And that's where the arrays are located. They built 4 more 035s. These weren't necessarily planned, but the 039 program had some delays, and so they just cranked out 4 more. To our understanding, these are largely still in service. But this was the last class that was really based on World War II design philosophy, the ship form, if you will. Now, at the same time, they were coming out with their first nuke boats. The first 2 091s, we've talked about this before. They were nightmares. Lots of mechanical problems, to include leakage of primary reactor coolant. The last 3 are 8 meters longer. They have a more powerful reactor, and that extra space allowed them to put in proper shielding and make habitability and maintenance somewhat easier. The 3 also had the passive ranging array. You can see the little lines here. That marks the location along the hull. Basically, this is telling a tug, don't push here, please. Yeah, that would be bad. They are fairly loud. They're very comparable to the Hotel Echo November types. And for a 1970s era SSN, they're relatively slow. But really, what really surprised us is that they were toothless dragons up until 1989, because the 091s had shorter torpedo tubes, and you couldn't put a YU1 in or a YU4 into it. It would kind of stick out a meter into the torpedo room, and it's really hard to flood and equalize to fire if you've got water coming into the hull. Same thing with the 092, their first SSBN. There's a lot of debate whether or not this boat ever truly was operational. All the declassified DoD reports, both from the Air Force as well as from the Navy, were just, they never came out and said the JL1 reached operational capability. The best thing I ever saw was like the bullet. Operational status was considered questionable. Don't know what this boat's doing. I suspect it will probably end up at the museum at Qingdao, but we'll have to wait and see. Now, when you look at their early sonar systems, they're Russian. Okay, you've got the MG-10 Phoenix. This is shown off a Foxtrot, but that's what was on a lot of the whiskeys. It was on a lot of was on the Romeos. And it's basically equivalent to the USB QR2. It's about the same size, uses roughly the same technology. Displays are a little different, but no big deal. The operator console is described as integrated. That just means both functions are executable from that console. Now, when they built it up for the nuke boats, the SQZ-3, it's basically the same thing, just about twice as big. It's just whole heck of a lot bigger. But the operator console is exactly the same. Now, when you look at torpedoes of this era, they are copies, for large part, of Russian weapons. The YU-1 is actually a copy of the 5339. I know Janes and everybody likes to say it's the 5351, but you can tell that that's not correct because there is no magnetic influence coils. And the tail configuration is not correct for a 5351. This is a World War II torpedo. They did try to make it a passive homer. A thermal torpedo with passive homing doesn't really work well. So in 1986, they came out with an active passive homer. Again, it's not going to work great, but it's going to work better than just passive. The YU-4A came out soon thereafter, and it's basically the SAET-50. And that's a anti-ship passive homing only, and they backfitted it with a active passive system in 1990. Again, it's still anti-ship. The YU-3 was to be the first anti-submarine torpedo, and it's largely based on the Soviet SAET-53. It's shorter, but this is a modified Chinese design, and it just took forever for them to get into the order of battle. For the missile side, they had the YG-8 family, and that, when you have to surface to fire, that's just not very workable in particularly with the short range that the YG-8 had at the time. You're talking about 40 kilometers, 22 and a half miles. You're way too close to somebody to be up on the surface and trying to shoot. You're incredibly vulnerable. But they tried it anyway. Now, when we get to the late 90s, they've branched out. They're starting to do their own work. Although the initial Song class really looks a lot like an Agosta. And some people would say, well, how can you really tell? I said, well, the general shape, but what really catches my attention is the torpedo tube shutter doors open outward. They hinge outward. That is very much what an Augusta has. The first one that you see on the left, a lot of problems with the design. It was not considered acceptable. They really didn't like the sail. So they then modified the hull, modified the sail, and started building the 039G, which can also fire some anti-ship cruise missiles, the early YG-82s. And they were quieter. The 039G1s came even later, about 2003, and they started being fitted with anechoic coating. So these are ocean-going boats that are starting to look more like modern, teardrop-shaped attack submarines. Then they get their first kilos. These are incomplete kilos that have been sitting on the construction ways, and I think these were up at Nizhny Novgorod, Gorky. And the Chinese bought from in early 1994. So these are off-the-shelf kilos. But it introduced China to a lot of Russian submarine technology, to include, this is probably when they finally got the coating, because the kilo has anechoic coating, and a lot of quieting concepts are in the kilo. Then in 97, they bought the 636, which had even more quieting inside it. In fact, it's the one of the first submarines to have the pneumatic isolation mounts, the RKO variety. Again, the 636s are incomplete Russian platforms that China bought in 1997. They then went back and asked for another group of 8, but specifically, if you read some of the articles of the time, the Chinese had to buy the 636Ms to get the SSN-27B Sizzler. They really wanted that cruise missile. The downside of the 636, the sensors and fire control are the absolute same as the Project X-77, but it is an incredibly quiet submarine. We also start seeing the original Type 093s. The first two I've described as being somewhat disappointing. They were surprisingly noisy, at least as far as the U.S. Navy was concerned. They're faster, but if you read all the write-ups in all the discussion online, you come away with that 30 knots is where they wanted to be. But all the discussions since the middle part of these boats coming out, they don't appear to do that. They're really down around 28 knots. One of them may have gotten the sail. They got the sail modified, but it only happened to one, and a minor increase in speed. Now, at this point, the sonars that they're looking at look a lot more like the French. The SQZ 262 is really attributed to be like the French Eladon system. And this could be due to the fact that they had access at this time to the Pakistani Agostas, which had the DSUV-2H and the Dux-2. And then the Chinese bought the DUX-5 when it was legal to buy from the French. So what you have here, again, is you have medium frequency passive and active arrays, but you're getting into digital beamforming. And that was a big deal. And a lot of these systems were backfitted to the Type 035 and the Type 033. One of the big things they got out of this when they got the kilos was they got the MGK 400 Rubicon. Now, this is not as advanced as the French systems, but the advantage for the MGK 400 is an incredibly massive hull array. This thing is almost as big as a BQQ-5 sphere. It's 4.5 meters in diameter and it's 3 meters tall. That's huge for a conventional submarine. And they also had a standalone active array. You can see that on the right, which is the traditional free-flooded ring transducers, so that this thing could make pulses just like a Victor 1, a Victor 2, or even close to what a Victor 3 did. Same technology, just different frequency.
Sorry, Chris, because you needed to go away for a minute. I still see the kilo slideshot on my screen. I'm not sure if you updated.
Peter, what are you seeing?
I think Peter is out from the computer because there's some emergency on his end. Unfortunately, he's not with us.
Okay, Larry, what do you see?
I see the kilo slide.
Just the kilo.
Yes.
Just the kilo.
Okay, I don't understand why it's not moving then.
Okay, we maybe later someone supplanted because Peter wrote me that he had some emergency and
right.
And he stepped out for a moment.
Okay. All right, I'm going to try and slide back. Okay, you guys still see the 877 EKM, right?
Yes.
Nothing changes, unfortunately.
Okay. Has it moved?
No.
Nope.
It freezed on it.
Oh. All right. Hang on. We shall try this again.
Okay.
Not
very mention
not
it
too
now,
sure why it likes to do that.
I have no idea. I don't know if you will be able to. Did you full screen it out? Because I don't know if we'll be able to show your presentation without Peter.
What do you see now?
Yeah, nothing. I mean, we only see our screens. I'm writing to Peter. Sorry, because it was very interesting talk, and I
Well, then I'll tell you what. We'll just do this the hard way.
We'll do the second part from the kilo next time, because I'm very interested what they did later. I guess more reverse engineering Russians, some more.
Okay, now do you see what do you see now?
No, we only see our avatars. That's what I see. I'm guessing.
Uh,
You know what? We probably need to just make part 2 from Kilo up to now. Because Peter is not around, unfortunately. He said when he returns he just will stop for us to disconnect, and he will stop the chat later. Mm,
this
because
is really bizarre.
I know.
And we're still showing avatars, yes?
Yes. I think the Peter need to show your screen. That's unfortunate because none of us has access.
Okay. Well,
So sorry for that, mate.
yeah, I don't know what's going on with that either. We've
Oh, and we lost Chris entirely.
Chris, you went stealth.
I don't think he's here. I have a question to you, Larry. I think you might have, it's kind of a side, but you might have write about it somewhere or talk, because what you said, uh, that Soviet plan against the convoys, at least you thought it will be sending submarines south and doing the fire bomber strikes, but it turned out not to be the case. What actually Soviets wanted to do, it turned
Well,
out.
what we understand now is that the Soviets, the strategy, at least in the Atlantic side, was it was entirely defensive. They intended to make NATO incursions into the Norwegian Sea so dangerous that NATO just wouldn't even try it. They were talking Bastion for their SSBNs, and beyond that, any ship that poked its nose into the Norwegian Sea would be viciously attacked by submarines and airstrikes. But they had no intention of going south of the Greenland, Iceland, UK line. They regarded that as such hostile territory that they didn't want any part of it.
Okay. Because I knew about Bastion, but I thought it was just one part of their plan. So you say it was pretty much the only plan.
Tom, you're garbled a little bit. I'm sorry. Can you please repeat?
Yes. How about now? It's better? Yeah, that's my laptop. Today is not the day. How can you hear me now?
Yes, you're a little clearer now.
Okay, so because I know the Bastion plan, but I thought it was only one part of the plan. So you say it was pretty much their only plan.
Well, yes, their plan. They always. My interpretation is that they were always thinking in terms of nuclear strategy. That was the driver. Everything else came after they had the nuclear issues resolved, and they were very worried about NATO carriers as nuclear strike platforms, and they were very worried about preserving their own nuclear deterrent. And so it's interesting that they were very worried. I mean, that seems to be the thing. They were concerned that they could get in, or we could get into their territory and cause a lot of damage. So everything was was a defensive mindset. They set up the Bastion, rings of mines and submarine patrols and aircraft and surface ships protecting their nuclear ballistic missile submarines, and that was going to be in the Barents Sea or maybe the Kara Sea. I've never seen a map saying exactly where they were thinking to do that, but they don't share. And then beyond that, everything was geared so that if we poked our nose into the Norwegian Sea with a strike with attack submarines would be they'd look for those with anti-submarine ships and and aircraft. If we put a carrier in there, that's when you start, as I said before, seconding things over from long-range aviation if you had to. But they were going to kill anything that went into the Norwegian Sea dead. And the fact that we're thinking in conventional terms, they're always thinking in nuclear terms. they're always worried about this carrier carrying nuclear weapons that can strike Russian territory. That, I think, was their primo driver on all their overall strategy.
Okay, so do we know did they had any plans of interdicting again? I'm garbled.
I'm sorry, Tom. Again, you were garbled.
How about now?
Well, it sounds good.
Okay. So do we know if they had any plans of interdicting convoys? Because I thought this was large part of the plan to just survive the Europe, right? Or just drive through the Europe to stop the convoys from going from US to Europe. Because without that,
I to tell you the truth, I don't remember reading a lot about Soviet strategy where they were saying stop the convoys. They may have felt that because the Atlantic Ocean was basically a hostile basin, that their chances of doing it. They may have thought about sending a few submarines south just to keep us honest. Certainly, some of the older boats that were not suitable for anti-submarine work and were more anti-surface could be sent south to attack the convoys. But the good stuff, the stuff that could take on a Los Angeles boat or a British Swiftsure on an even basis, that stuff was going to stay north, protecting the SSBNs.
okay, that's very interesting. And I wonder if some of the land games shouldn't be, remodeled after knowing that.
Well, listen, we have so many games. We've never done Dance of the Vampires using the Harpoon 5 rules. And those rules, when we introduced targeting, it really, I think, deepened our understanding of naval warfare. But at the same time, there's a lot of old scenarios we can go back and replay and go, maybe this wasn't such an easy task for them. But
Yeah.
I'm not sure that it would matter. I mean, mathematically, what happens is, let's say you're looking at a radar screen and you're trying to target the carrier in the center,
Mhm.
and you know that you're going to lose a certain number of them they're going to lock on the other ships in the formation. Now, if you have a failed targeting rule under the rules, that just means you're not going to hit the ship you intended to hit. You hit one of the other ships instead. So I think it simply spreads out the formation, the damage to the formation over a wider number of vessels. I mean, as I recall, the games we've played, one Ka-22 plus one warship basically equals nothing. And so it may actually mean that more of the formation dies and enough Ka-22s may still get through to the convoy or get through the carrier to sink it or at least put it out of action. I don't know if it would make a huge change, but I haven't run the numbers. Dance of the Vampires, I think, still holds up as it did in the book. That was all about deception and suckering NATO off in the wrong direction. So it certainly doesn't invalidate the story that Tom told. I think that's still fine.
Maybe, yeah, but it's interesting reading it now when to see how the Western intelligence looked at the time, and I still have books from the 80s that say that Heinz used laser guided missiles, probably.
No,
Sorry.
no.
I've seen, or the performance of MiG-29, how it was. I guess it was part of